Hello and welcome. Are we here? Can you see us? Here we are. Yes. Hello and welcome to Gript's weekly live stream. I am your lately absent host, Fatima Gunning. I'm joined today by my fantastic colleague, Jason Osborne, who has been very helpful in either the absence of me or Gary Kavanagh over the last, I think it's 3 weeks at this point. We've been kind of messing people around on coming on or not coming on. It's all been for a very good reason, I assure you. Some of that I cannot discuss because there are court orders in place barring me from discussing it on pain of imprisonment for contempt of court. So take my word for it when I say I've been busy. Anyway, Jason, thanks for coming on. I think this is the first time we've actually collaborated in any meaningful way.
Yeah, it is. It's funny because it's not this live stream isn't my baby, but I was thinking about it earlier. I think I've been on 3 of the 4 this month. So maybe it's becoming my baby. I don't know, but people who are sick of me anyway aren't going to be happy with the development between this and the podcast. People are getting a lot of my living room beamed to them. So happy to do it though, and happy to collaborate. I'm curious to hear what you've been up to this week.
Yes, let me say first, I'm truly deeply sorry. Anyway, here we go. What have I been doing? So at the CCJ, the Central Criminal Court this morning, the man who stands accused of the Parnell school stabbing, Riad Backer, has had the case further delayed for another 4 weeks. The last time it was before the courts was the 30th of April, and then it was delayed until today because a Dr. Mary Daverin is having quite a bit of quite a task. What was it called? A forensically difficult task was the quote one of the councils used this morning in putting together a psychiatric report in respect of Mr. Backer. And that's going to take at least another 3 weeks to be
Wow.
finished. But, Justice Paul McDermott did he urged them to kind of get on with it. I think that the court is in some way getting a little bit impatient that this needs to be put on.
Okay, yeah, I mean, given that it was back November 2023, and we're, as we were saying before we went live, nearly halfway through 2025, like it really is getting on, especially when, I mean, I know there's sort of particular difficulties around getting the ball rolling on this one, but there's been obviously other cases in relation to the events of that evening that are proceeding apace. So I think that, yeah, there's probably a lot of impatience from many places to see that get moving.
Yeah, now that you mention it, there was a case of a 20-year-old man, he was 18 at the time, who pleaded guilty to charges of riot, criminal damage and arson in relation to the setting on fire of a Lewis on the 23rd of November. Yes, and I'm not going to comment on it, he hasn't been sentenced, but suffice it to say that he has been remanded in custody pending sentencing. I think it was next month. I'm sorry, it's just gone out of my head. I do so many cases, but that report is on gript.ie if people want to go and check it out in clearer detail. Another thing that came up before the courts was the man accused of the murder of 8-year-old Aisha Al-Khatib. His name is Mohammed Al-Shakir Al-Tamimi, and yes, I'm reading that from my notes because it's a mouthful. His case was mentioned before the courts this morning, and it's been set for trial in Waterford from the 12th of January 2026. So if anybody was wondering what's going on with that, that's where we are at this stage, and a psychological report has been ordered in respect of the accused. So
Yeah,
Jason, what have you been doing?
Yeah, a lot less than you by the sounds of things anyway. Although I will say getting the court beat is handy because you're just able to go down. It's just always remarkable to me that you go down to the court and you're just guaranteed to see and hear interesting things every day. It's just an endless stream for stories. What I've been doing is I have an article that we're posting pretty much exactly after this. It took a bit of time, I think, probably to our editors' bemusement or frustration, but I put an article together about Ireland's philanthropy policy, because a lot of people probably don't know that. So we're churning out, I would say, a lot of interesting policies in recent years that, it's just the way these things, most people aren't paid to read these things, so they're not going to. Why would they? Why would you be interested in reading about the National Social Enterprise Policy? Why would you be interested in reading about the National Philanthropy Policy? Thankfully for us who are, paid to be looking into different things, such are able to do, so you can put it into a digestible news story for people, which is essentially what I tried to do here. Because even though it might be very boring on the face of it, it's pretty, I would say, pretty important stuff, and that's what I try to convey in this article, which people will be able to read shortly. Because it essentially asks the question, as I say in the opening to it, what if big money could come riding to the rescue of a government that's ultimately incapable of delivering the sort of vision of social good that it has for its citizens? It's a really interesting document because it's essentially all about the purpose of the policy is to create an enabling environment and accelerate engagement with philanthropy in Ireland for social good. Now, that all sounds pretty neutral, but as I observed in it, and as will be pretty obvious to anyone reading it, if your vision of social good happens to align with the government's and with the philanthropists in question, well and good. And there's many ways in which, everyone's vision of the good would align. There's lots of non-controversial ways in which this works itself out, like, funding for sports facilities, sporting clubs, disability organizations, investment in educational facilities and whatnot. That's all fine. No one is disagreeing with that. The difficulty is that this funding can be politically oriented, and a great example of this is Atlantic Philanthropies, which is a absolutely massive American fund, essentially. And the reason I bring them up is, number one, because they're a good example in the Irish context, but number two, in relation to the national philanthropy policy, they come up repeatedly in this policy as an example nearly of a sort of model collaboration between government and a philanthropist with regards to cooperating on questions of policy and infrastructure and things in the country. They note this themselves. They say, like, they note that from the mid 1980s, which obviously was a fairly rough time for Ireland economically and socially, Atlantic Philanthropies came into the picture. And while they've, like, provided money for, again, some of those non-controversial things I mentioned above, like disability organizations and whatnot, they've also provided money for entirely questionable things. They have on their website, they have a page talking about how they invested over 63 million to, quote, advance human rights in Ireland, including those of LGBT people. And it did those by supporting the Gay and Lesbian Equality Network and Marriage Equality and its predecessor, which they note are two organizations that laid the groundwork for passage of the Civil Partnership Law in 2010 and ultimately for the marriage equality vote in 2015. So, like, that stuff is inherently political. And there's many more ways in which you could point to it being political, including sort of them funding organizations that, were pro-abortion and things in 2018. So the big picture here, to zoom out a little bit and get away from the technicalities, is that you have a government policy that's all about encouraging philanthropy in Ireland, not just from sort of domestic sources, but again, they keep citing Atlantic Philanthropies as this positive example of government cooperating with international philanthropists and things like this. But, for those of us who would say disagree with the direction of travel in Ireland, there's lots of reasons to disagree with Atlantic Philanthropies' interventions, I suppose, to put that into Irish civic and social space. So, again, I've never seen anyone comment on this national philanthropy policy, but this is going to be the document that guides Ireland's, work and vision on this stuff over the next, at least until 2028. So I think it's very important that people be aware that these policies are there and that these are the kind of visions that Ireland is encouraging, especially because we hear so much these days about, foreign interference on the level of information and on the informational level and also on the financial level and things like this. But that only ever seems to work in one direction. It's like here you very clearly have, as it says on their own Wikipedia for Atlantic Philanthropies, an organization that often supports left-leaning or progressive causes and policies, that's sort of given free rein to bring its money to Ireland and sort of get involved in, as this policy lays clear, shaping Ireland's sort of civic and social space. So people should definitely be aware of this because there's a real one-sidedness to it. But that's essentially one of the things that I was doing this week because there was a lot of reading and background to it. So maybe not as interesting as you sitting down in the course, but I would like to think probably pretty important to get on the record as well.
I think it reminds me of this joke, which I'm going to butcher, but it's basically about two fish swimming in opposite directions, and then one of them says to the other one, the water's nice today. And then the other one goes, what the hell is water? You know what I mean? So it's like that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
stuff. We're completely surrounded by it. And, if it wasn't like if it wasn't for journalists like yourself saying that, like, well, this is the water in Ireland at the moment that no one actually notices, because do the Irish people really want what you've mentioned? Do they really want all of this, as you said, like, just more or less one-sided, left-leaning, like liberalism? Is that really what would benefit the country? Is that what the country needs now? Is that what people want?
Yeah, it's well, like, and there's certainly, if there is money funding organizations to take particular stances on these things, there's a big argument to be made that those organizations then are going on to shape public perception of these issues. So, it might result in a victorious vote for one side or whatever, but bar that organization's intervention, who could say how things would have gone? But as you say, it kind of is the air that we breathe at the moment, or the water that we're swimming in, such that these sort of anything that's moving in a progressive liberal direction, certainly in Ireland, is just sort of accepted these days. And I was really reminded of that. The days kind of blur together for me as well these at the moment. But at the end of last week, I also wrote an article about how there is something to the idea that democracy is under attack these days, as we always hear from our institutions. But I would say, it's more so under attack from those same institutions than it is from a lot of the places that they're citing. Like, Michael McGrath, our European Commissioner, gave an address at the beginning of last week about what was it on? It was essentially about defending European democracy, this kind of thing, and he was talking all about how the EU has all of these initiatives, and in the course of it, in the sort of Q&A afterwards, he was kind of positioning Ireland as this kind of anti-Hungary and anti-Poland, which are obviously sort of held up as, those aren't his words now, but that's sort of the way Ireland was being positioned. Obviously the perception being that Hungary and Poland are sort of backwaters where conservative or traditional values trample all over progressive ones. And I think the fact that you can convincingly position Ireland as the opposite of those things is quite troubling. And I think, listening to his address and reading policies like this week, you really do get a sense that, like, we are unfortunately an example of very successful progressive institutionalizing progressive liberalism, to put it that way. And I think that the sort of full extent of this is still being felt at the moment, because whereas there's maybe kickback against some of these things elsewhere, not just in Hungary and Poland, we still haven't seen that here.
Yeah, I think when they say stuff about European democracy, what they're really talking about is European liberalism. Like, they're saying democracy is under attack. No, it's not. This is democracy. If somebody wants to vote for Marine Le Pen in France, that's their democratic right to vote for her. Similarly, with what happened in Romania recently, people have a right to disagree, and this is kind of deeply established liberal elite, I think, see that they're going out of fashion and in some ways are panicking.
I think that's entirely accurate. I think because they keep talking about how, like, for people who might be inclined to vote in the essentially not progressive liberal direction. So these people are sort of just, taking in unquestioningly that which is being fed to them by their so-called, like, populist leaders who are offering simplistic solutions to complex questions, as Michael McGrath put it. And it's like, no, does it occur to anyone that it might be the case that people are sort of dissatisfied with the way things are going, and so they're trying to express themselves, in the other direction politically? But it's just like, if you're willing to vote for, to use that example, Marine Le Pen in France or AfD in Germany or any of these alternatives, it's just sort of seen as unacceptable, and that you can't possibly have cooperated in good faith with the society that you're living in. Like, so it's the deck is very much stacked against those who sort of disagree with the way things are going. And I think it's only a small contribution, like looking at the national philanthropy policy, but I do think the more people that are aware of these things and aware of the sort of zeitgeist that our leaders in particular are living in, the better, because it's kind of plain as day for anyone to see, you would like to think.
Well, yeah. I mean, you have to be aware. Like, it's kind of becoming a bit like the Truman Show in a way, where people are
Yeah.
suddenly like, "Wait, are the thoughts in my head mine?" Like, where? Oh man, yeah. I know. I know that there's a bit of a raging discussion online this week. I've been trying to stay off Twitter really because it is what it is. It's a bit stressful to be on Twitter too much. But there has been a bit of a debate about what Irish nationalism is, who is not allowed to be an Irish nationalist or call themselves that, or who's a heretic or who's an apostate. And like, there's a lot of hissy fits going on online at the moment, put it that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've long said it, like, for people who listen to the podcast, and I like to think I've probably put in articles as well, like, things aren't going to get better. And I include that for sort of conservatives or nationalists as well. Things aren't going to get better until we start sort of giving people the benefit of the doubt. And I know people hear that coming out of my mouth and they're like, oh, but the other side doesn't give us the benefit of the doubt or anything. And it's like, yeah, it's true. But I think this sort of dialectic of just like, yeah, they're worse than us. No, they're worse than us doesn't help anyone. I think like you need to start giving like people who've done good work the benefit of the doubt and like have your discussions, have your disagreements, but like just sort of making certain people anathema or right saying that this person does the movement no good. It's like all you're going to do is I don't know, keep cutting potential limbs off yourself to no avail.
I think there's a really immature way of dealing with this. And like maybe it's because of the nature of online activity. But a lot of people, instead of what I've noticed, and I'm not pointing fingers in any specific direction. I think it could be applied to like quite liberally actually. But what a lot of people seem to do is to assume that something that they may have misinterpreted was done through malice. So they'd be like, oh, I sent this to like Gript and like they didn't cover it and blah, blah, blah. And like, oh, they're censoring me. When in reality, what might be the case is that you, for whatever reason, weren't able to provide us with enough evidence of your claims to get us over the bar for publication, which is very, very high. And in that sense, it's not that we don't like you. It's not that we don't believe you. It's just that you haven't met the bar and we cannot stake our reputation. It just doesn't work that way. It's nothing personal. But people have a tendency to take things very personally and, in a broader sense as well, to kind of jump to a negative conclusion about the motivation of another person that they may not have ever met. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's it's a balance that has to be struck between like not losing the authenticity of your um disagreement, again, to go back to that idea with the direction of travel, because I think that's what has sort of pointed a lot of people in Gript's direction, because like they weren't sort of being served by traditional media. The traditional media weren't asking the questions people wanted to see asked. There wasn't really a forum for the discussion that people felt had to take place, given a lot of those problems that Ireland faces at the moment. So you want to maintain that authenticity while at the same time being realistic about the environment that you're operating in. And like, particularly when it comes to like doing journalism or doing what, certainly we're trying to do, there are certain standards that have to be met. So you're right. Like you can't just, something may well have happened, like, but in journalism, it's not enough for a thing just to have happened. You have to be able to stand up that thing, and you have to be able to. There's all sorts of criteria that have to be met and bars that you have to reach, and that's not always possible. So, like, and I mean, as well as on top of that, it's just the practicalities of things, that like the sort of volume of correspondence that Gript gets. Like, we're a relatively small team. It's just not possible to cover everything. Like, so I do feel like, again, yeah, the point that you're making, it's like certainly an unhelpful thing amongst people that you've seen to do good work and who are generally sensible. You don't have to agree with them on everything, but who are generally sensible. One of the best things, I think, for you want to call it the movement, or for the movement of people who are dissatisfied with the way things have gone in Ireland, is to start offering people the benefit of the doubt and sort of assuming that their actions are coming from a place of malice, but rather just from a place that's different to yours, and that as long as you can have a conversation with them, like that's sort of the most important thing in this regard.
We had an interesting short discussion before we came online, and then I was like, shut up, we're going to get the good stuff, but it's not going to be on the live stream. But like, you were basically saying that, what was it, the people had gotten a bit crazy since COVID? Was your line?
Yeah, the point that I was kind of making is that, like, God knows, and I've written about it many times, that I think that 99% of what happened during the pandemic was absolutely nuts, like genuinely. And I feel like it's an absolute farce that the COVID-19 inquiry that we're finally getting is an entirely defanged thing. Like they talk about, for example, how they won't have powers to compel witnesses or evidence. And it's like, what is that then? Like they speak about how they want it to be a non-adversarial process. They don't want it to be about finger pointing, but about lessons learned. And I think that's an absolute joke. Like there absolutely should be accountability. Otherwise, what's to stop people from behaving badly in the future? So that's all just to say that, like, yeah, I believe COVID was handled absolutely horrendously, and it did people an absolute ton of harm in a load of ways. But that said, I'm Catholic, you're Catholic. I feel like the bottom line always has to be that you can't allow what's going on in the world to sort of compromise your person or sort of make you sort of lose your mind, to put it that way. And I feel like that did happen with a lot of people in relation to COVID, which is that the world hasn't moved on from COVID. Like they can't get over those harms. And it's like, yeah, no one is saying these things aren't wrong. No one is saying that there shouldn't be accountability in relation to them, but you can't allow it to sort of warp your vision, because that's sort of ultimately unhelpful for you and for everyone around you. And I feel like a similar thing is sort of happening in relation to immigration at the moment, which is that it's enormously important, and it is changing the fabric of Ireland, certainly for the short, medium, and probably long term. No one is saying it doesn't have to be addressed. No one's saying it doesn't have to be dealt with. But like, it ultimately isn't, in my view, God. Like you have to be able to locate it within a bigger framework or a bigger world. And I would be of the opinion that that's the only way you're actually going to do any good, because if you sort of make it your God, yeah, it starts doing to people what I think happened to some people during COVID, which is that if you don't sort of toe the exact same line as those who have made this their lives, you're excluded from the movement, you're excluded from this, you're excluded from that. And it's like, it might feel good, but you're not going to get anything that functions that way. You're not going to get anything that actually builds any good for Ireland.
Yeah, and I think when you go down this road of like finger pointing, it almost becomes as though if you're perceived to be on a certain side of, like, let's say it's a battle or whatever, if you're perceived to be on a certain side and then you say something that is slightly like, left of center of whatever the political dogma is, I see that there is on, the kind of the free speech side or the alternative side or like the right wing side, whatever you want to call it, there is elements of this kind of petty cancel. Like, is it an attempt to cancel that person? It's like, oh, for example, like, oh, John McGurk said something I don't like, therefore I'm going to punish Gript by like unsubscribing or something like that. And it's like, look, John is like a great friend of mine. Like, there are things that we will never there are things that we will never agree on until the day we die. But I don't feel the need to, like, put him on blast on social media all the time. And, I've seen someone else doing that to people that I really care about this week. And I just really don't really understand what the point is. I don't really understand why there's this puritanicalism about certain dogma that I hitherto kind of thought was a bit of a silliness of the left, shall I say? Like, a little bit of a silliness of the left, like women can have penises, like so that. And now I'm seeing something quite similar emerging. Well, maybe similar. I'd say it's milder for now, at least, but I think that there are elements of it there.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing to prevent the right is fallible in the same way that the left is fallible, and that we're all human. Like, and I think this is just something that's sort of being lost at the moment. But I do think that, yeah, the one thing, and so, people sort of think it's maybe a bit of a utopian point or a bit pie in the sky, but I sort of stand by it because I've just seen so many examples of how it works. That, like, yeah, until you stop sort of assuming the worst of people who you've seen to be doing good work and who you agree with on many things. Like, that's also the crazy thing. A lot of times people that you agree with on many things, you might just have, say, a couple points of contention or had a couple of bad interactions. You just need to, I don't know, you're not going to build anything that way, because you're just going to sort of keep cleaving apart from one another. But one thing as well that I wanted to, lest we digress from our news reporting, Jude, I don't know if you object to one thing that I wanted to bring up. because I feel like it's just one of the sort of generational news stories that is just sort of being let slide in many places, is Ireland looking very much like it's going to fail to meet its emissions targets. And I don't mean it's going to be generational in the sense that, oh, that's it, Ireland's underwater now. More so that Ireland looks like it's going to be facing absolutely bloody enormous fines because of this. Like literally eye-watering fines. You know, we were talking about what a boon this Apple windfall was last year. It was a 14 billion or something.
13.
Whereas the something like that, but it was massive, like, and it greatly inflated our surplus. But like the worst case scenario, if Ireland misses these, because it's supposed to slash emissions by 51% by 2030, greenhouse gas emissions or whatever, and if we don't, the worst case scenario is that may end up having to pay, if I remember correctly, 26 billion in fines. That's the worst case, which is like, yeah, two Apple windfalls almost. If you take the high end, like 14 billion. And there's just like there is no way in hell we're going to meet that target. It's just completely. I mean, unless they just start, I don't know, shutting off infrastructure and taking all sorts of like completely just infeasible measures. There's no way it's going to be met. So I feel like this is one that again is slipping under the radar. That like if COVID was like the early 2020s and immigration is the issue of the mid 2020s and obviously will continue going on longer, this is going to be potentially, if they do try to sort of like force measures through that enable them to meet this 51% target by 2030, like it's just going to be catastrophic for life as we know it in Ireland. So I feel like that may well be the story of the late 2020s.
I remember hearing that it was the case that, like, when you look at emissions levels, if Ireland, like, you know, I know you're not in Ireland right now, but let's say you are hypothetically, if like Ireland, this building, this street, the entire country just ceased to exist like that, it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference to the global emissions. Like, it's so stupid.
It's yeah. I mean, and I spoke about this a little bit in relation to the what was it? Oh yeah, the Leaving Cert course in relation to climate action and things like this, where they're yeah, like just so much the framing around all of this is warped. I mean, they include Ireland as part of the global north, and a lot of the because they have this framing like global north and global south in relation to these climate issues. Global north is generally seen as, you know, colonizers who've profited off of the global south and who've also just sort of boosted their own emissions at the expense of the global south. And it's like it's an absolute joke to include Ireland in that. I mean, Ireland, you know, compared to like Germany or the UK or a bunch of other European nations, was very late in sort of industrializing to the same degree. I mean, we were remarkably impoverished, you know, well into the 20th century. Um, so it's ridiculous to, you know, sort of categorize. I mean, we're you know, wealthy on paper now, and certainly wealthier than many countries in the South. But like the idea that we stand alongside, you know, America, the UK, Germany, France as sort of the leading polluters and what's the word you would use? Exploiters, I suppose, of the natural world is just a joke. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't correspond to reality.
While you're having your coffee fit. Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
just
I
think
got
it's just,
emotional about it there.
yeah, like, oh no, I can't continue. Like, no, it's absolutely ridiculous the way, like, you know, I don't particularly believe in, you know, even when you bring in other topics like intergenerational guilt, like, I don't believe in holding white Americans accountable for what, like, you know, white Americans did before the white Americans now were alive. I don't, you know, all that kind of like, it's just ridiculous crap. And just to tar everyone with the same brush and like the stuff that Irish people have never been involved in or very, very, you know, in the case of this climate stuff, very mildly responsible for. It's just so, it's just intellectually like just disingenuous. It doesn't make any sense. And all it can do is harm us. And yeah.
People just like to, you know, people like simple narratives because they're easy to, you know, regurgitate with their friends and things like this. And this is sort of like a, you know, again, sort of progressive liberal ones are easy to do because, you know, who's going to argue that the planet isn't a good thing and that, you know, we all need to do our utmost to preserve it. Whereas, yeah, when you sort of dig into it, it's like there's a lot of nuance there. And, you know, as Ben and I said on one episode of the podcast recently, it's like, even if you were to sort of agree with like the most catastrophic projections for climate change and things related to that, there's a whole range of ways in which that could be responded to. It's not like there's one, set course of action that we all have to agree on. Like it would be such a complex scenario that there's a whole range of ways in which people could disagree in good faith with regards to, how you would respond to it. But it's like, no, we've started all adopting this simple narrative about how, no, this is the thing we need to do, that's the thing we need to do, in response to it. And it's like, yeah, it's very intellectually lazy. But I just thought it's worth mentioning that one, because, as I said, I think this is going to be one of the stories of the late 2020s. And as with so many things, if there's no sort of pushback on it now, or no conversation about it now, I'm just going to sort of sleepwalk into that situation. I'd be of the opinion that, come what may, Ireland should probably just pull out of this agreement, because painful as that may be through sanctions or through sort of the political blowback, I doubt it'll be as painful as, either implementing the measures through some heavy-handed way or having to pay those fines.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that there is a great appetite out there for honest conversations. I think a lot of, as you said, like, these conversations are not being had in an honest manner, like, especially when you have, like, the state broadcaster funneling out all this, like, climate stuff unquestioningly, and recently with Ben, I'm paraphrasing this, but he basically asked Simon Harris about the kind of climate activism in the curriculums, and then Simon Harris was like, of course it's a good thing, like, we all accept this is true. And it's like, well, actually, no, maybe you all in, your little bubble accept it's true, but, when you're looking at measures that will harm the economy and, like, harm people in real world ways, I don't think you can just say, well, this is settled and, like, so be it. Like, this kind of fatalistic approach that many of the politicians have, like, to immigration. It's like, well, thousands of people are just going to keep coming here, and many of them without passports, and there's nothing we can do about it. Yes, there is something you can do about it, but you're choosing not to.
I do love that, like, that line they have these days about how you can just do things. I think it's, like, so true, because people just generally, politicians just act as though there's nothing can be done about these situations. It's like, there's actually a lot can be done.
It's like, what do you think your job is? Do you know what I mean? Because that was like me, like, oh no, if only somebody would write an article about this. Like,
yeah,
oh,
exactly. Sending emails into Gript to get them to cover something in your work here, but, like, just on that, I don't think I made the point on a previous live stream or podcast. They kind of blur together for me now, but in relation to that, yeah, climate activism in schools, one point that I thought was really interesting in it that I didn't really, buoy up at the time, was that I included in the article, because I got via FOI these sort of this internal NCCA report in relation to the consultation feedback they got about that curriculum, that specification. And one bit of feedback they commented on was someone who was, like, sort of seemed to be positive about the course, saying that, how was it they phrased it? Said something along the lines that, there's a lot in the course and a lot in the feedback that is sort of, now I'm paraphrasing here, but it's kind of utopian. It paints this picture that everyone's on the same page about what we have to do, and about common action, and we're all together in this. Whereas the report was kind of saying, or acknowledging through this response, that it's just as possible that this course might promote disunity or disharmony in school communities, because, and I sort of read into this here, which is that, students who take this course, they noted these aspects of it in the thing, may well start taking issue with, a bunch of loads of their classmates jetting off on 6th-year holidays at the end of the year, because that's, like, unnecessary flight, which is, sort of a sin by that standard. They might take issue with school trips, because it's, again, unnecessary travel and things like this. So the potential for disharmony in relation to that curriculum is crazy. But I think, I didn't know if I touched on that point before, so I thought it was worth making. But there's a whole load of ways in which they haven't considered the consequences of their actions, to put it that way.
Well, I mean, yeah, like, if you're having kind of, like, activist-led curricula, it's like, well, what do you expect is going to happen?
Yeah.
And we're coming to the end of our lively live stream right now. We're coming to the end. Next week, I would like to say I'll be here. More realistically, you might expect me when you see me, but with the best of intentions, I do hope to be here next week. I see some of the comments coming in. People are saying that need to be having honest conversation. Someone asks, "Is my mother Irish and my father from Pakistan?" Yes, you're on the money. On that note, I guess we will love you and leave you. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining me. I will be diving back into the courts, and you will be diving back into your FOIing and all that kind of stuff.
Undoubtedly. What I was going to say, what fun, but then it actually is quite enjoyable. So
I'm glad someone enjoys that kind of thing. Okay, so goodbye, everyone. I've been Fatima Gunning. You have been Jason Osborne, and it's been great having you all. Slán agus Bannacht.